Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the thriller horror films from 2024, titled Grafted. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The movie begins with a Chinese girl named Wei drawing a flower she saw in her father's diary. Her dad says that it's called a corpse flower, which makes itself smelly to attract flies. We also notice that both of them have a strange scar on their faces, which appears to be genetic. Dad, who's a scientist, claims that he needs to work on something that will heal both of their faces. Afterward, Dad collects a serum he has created in a vial, and injects it into a piece of animal skin. He then places the skin on his scar, which surprisingly begins to heal. This makes him really happy, and it appears the experiment has worked. But seconds later, the skin begins to grow uncontrollably, almost covering his entire face. Struggling to breath, Dad cuts it off with a scalpel, but the skin quickly regenerates. A terrified Wei tries to help by repeatedly stabbing his face, but he ends up dying anyway. In the following scene, we see that many years have passed, and Wei has reached her late teens. She is passionate about science, and has been offered a scholarship to a prestigious college in New Zealand. Upon her arrival in the new country, Wei is picked up by her dad's sister, Aunt Ling. She is thrilled to see her niece after a long time, and agrees to let her stay at her place. On the way home, Aunt Ling informs Wei that her husband has left her, and she now lives with her daughter, Angela. When they arrive home, Wei meets Angela, and immediately notices how pretty she is. Aunt Ling comments that Wei will be a good influence on her cousin, who has forgotten her roots and can't even speak basic Chinese. Wei then settles into her new home, where she makes a shrine for her late father and serves him New Zealand food. The following day, Wei arrives for her first day of college, and asks a homeless, disfigured man named John, for directions to the science building, and the man kindly helps her. Later, we see Wei attending a lecture by a professor named Dr. Paul. She sits alone in the back, while Angela is in the front with her popular best friends Eve and Jasmine. Paul hands out the test results, and announces that only Wei scored a 100%, which is quite impressive. He also reveals that he is looking for a lab assistant, and invites anyone interested to volunteer. Afterward, Wei goes to the science lab, and takes out her dad's old notebook to study. Paul suddenly arrives at this moment and asks about the notebook, which is written in Chinese. Wei responds timidly that it belonged to her father, and she is attempting to finish his work. The professor sees potential in her, and offers her a position as his lab assistant. He promises that if she does a good job, he will let her work on the experiments, which Wei eagerly accepts. In another scene, we see Angela bringing her friends into the house, where they make fun of Wei's shrine. The girls are startled by her father's scar, and Angela reveals that Wei also has one, so she always wears a scarf. They then check out her room, where they find various photos of dismembered animals and insects. This freaks out the girls, prompting them to leave the room. They then start watching a movie, and when Wei returns home, she also joins them. However, the trio appears uncomfortable in her presence, and walks away, leaving her alone. Elsewhere, Paul receives an email from the research committee stating his funding will be withdrawn, unless he achieves a breakthrough in 2 weeks. The next day after classes, Wei notices Angela and her friends hanging out, which makes her feel envious. She thus approaches them, and awkwardly invites them to try her father's favorite Chinese food, which the girls hesitantly accept. But later, during the meal, we see that Angela is really uncomfortable. She refuses to eat anything, while Wei starts munching on some chicken fingers with her bare hands. This disgusts the girls, so Angela and Eve walk away without touching the food. Jasmine does eat some, but she too follows her friends shortly after. On the way home, Wei briefly chats with John and shows him her scars. Her mom once said that perhaps their ancestors did something bad, which is why she's so ugly, but John disagrees and assures her that she's beautiful. Paul then offers Wei a ride home. He says that he wants to focus on her research, and if they work together, they can achieve something groundbreaking. Upon returning home, Wei excitedly shares the good news with her late father's picture. She then hears noises in Angela's room, and peeks inside, where she discovers her cousin having fun with her boyfriend, Josh. But Angela's dog notices her peeking and begins barking aggressively. This alerts Angela to Wei's presence, and she scolds her, telling her cousin to stay away from her both at college and at home. She also insists that she doesn't want her home to smell like incense and rotting food. This deeply hurts Wei's feelings. The following morning, Wei and Paul study her dad's formula, and conclude that there's a missing component, a binding agent to merge skin tissue. They conduct a series of experiments to determine what the agent could be, but all of them fail. Days pass, and they work tirelessly without achieving any significant results. This causes Paul to become increasingly frustrated, and he begins venting his anger on the poor girl. One day, Jasmine walks into the lab, and asks Paul if he still needs an assistant, to which the professor surprisingly says yes, and gives her a sheet to sign. The two girls then head home together, and Jasmine apologizes to Wei, saying she wasn't trying to take her job. She understands how difficult it is to fit in, and suggests they look out for one another. This makes Wei feel better, but then her attention is drawn to a brochure about corpse flowers, that reminds her of her childhood. That evening, a determined Wei breaks into an exhibition of a rare corpse flower, and steals some fluid from it. She then returns to the lab, and uses the substance as a binding agent to complete the formula. In another room, we learn that Paul and Eve are having an affair, but they are interrupted by noises in the lab, and Paul is surprised to see his ex-lab assistant there. We see Wei take a section of skin off her thigh, and replace it with animal skin infused with her new formula. Surprisingly, her skin immediately begins to heal, confirming that the experiment has finally succeeded. Moments later, Paul approaches her, and Wei excitedly informs him that the formula has worked by showing her thigh. Eve misunderstands the situation and takes a picture of the moment. Eve then enters the room and pulls Wei away, saying it's time for girls' night. Once he's alone, Paul notices that Wei has left her dad's notebook behind, so he calls a friend and asks for help in translating the Chinese writings. Shortly after, Eve sends the photo to Angela. This enrages Angela, who immediately rushes home to confront her cousin. On the other hand, Eve takes Wei to a remote location, and warns her that sleeping with a teacher for grades is not a good idea. Wei denies the accusations, but Eve refuses to believe her. She then drives off alone, leaving the poor girl stranded in an isolated place. After walking for hours, Wei eventually returns home, only to find her enraged cousin waiting for her. She sees that her shrine has been destroyed and freaks out, claiming their ancestors will now curse them. But Angela doesn't care and immediately begins fighting with Wei. She tries to choke her to death. And then, as an act of self-defense, Wei strikes Angela with a nearby chopstick, resulting in her death. Wei is overcome with guilt and desperately tries to wake Angela, but to no avail. She thus takes the dead body to the bathroom, and comes up with a devious plan. After removing the chopstick, Wei cuts the skin on her face, and then a layer of skin from Angela's face too, and injects it with the substance. She then puts Angela's skin on her face, which causes her to go through a painful transformation. When it's over, Wei has shockingly transformed into Angela, and even her scar is gone. Moments later, Aunt Ling returns home, and Wei pretends to be Angela. The naive woman doesn't suspect a thing and hugs her, unaware that her real daughter's body is hidden right under the bed. Later, while Wei is watching videos of Angela to copy her mannerisms, Aunt Ling knocks on her door. She's going on a work trip for a week, and apologizes to her daughter for always being so busy. The next day, Wei arrives at college as Angela, and experiences what it's like to have everyone's attention on her. She hangs out with Eve and Jasmine after class, and neither of them suspects anything. In the afternoon, she is picked up by Josh, and the two head for a picnic in the secluded woods. Wei feels incredibly happy, because she has never had a boyfriend before. But then, Angela's face suddenly peels off and falls onto him. Panicked, Josh ends up accidentally falling off a cliff, to his death. Wei is horrified by the turn of events, and she desperately searches for her dad's notebook at home, but can't find it anywhere. She soon realizes that it is with the professor, but he doesn't answer her calls. Paul is researching Wei's father on the internet and studying his notebook. Here, he comes across a sketch of the corpse flower and eventually figures out the secret ingredient. On the other hand, Wei uses the substance to reattach Angela's face to her own, but grows worried as the liquid is running low. Afterward, Paul goes to the corpse flower exhibition to take some of the flower's parts, although they seem to have rotted. Meanwhile, Wei arrives at the science lab, and frantically searches for the notebook, but fails to locate it. She calls Paul again, but he claims that the notebook has disappeared. Paul also stresses that her work is done here and, as the lead scientist, the research belongs to him. This sends her into a fit of rage, so she steals some stuff from the lab before departing. The next day, Wei and Eve go shopping, after which they return to Wei's place for a sleepover. During this time, Eve notices a foul smell in the house, but Wei claims it's from her cousin's weird stuff. Eve has started to get uncomfortable, as she notices how Angela's skin starts getting worse, and wishes to leave, but Wei claims to have a surprise for her upstairs. And then suddenly,
Angie.
Wei launches an attack, prompting Eve to flee. The terrified girl exits the house, and hides in a nearby pond. Panicked, she decides to enter the pond, and stay hidden for a while by holding her breath. But the psycho notices her presence, and uses a drilling machine to pierce her skull. Wei drags the dead body inside the house, and proceeds to peel off her own face, and Eve's face as well. The next day, Wei has transformed into Eve, and has even dyed her hair blonde to look like her. Two cops suddenly arrive at the house, looking for Angela, but Wei claims she's not here right now. The cops still give the place a quick check, but don't find anything suspicious, and simply leave. In the next scene, Wei goes to college, where a worried Jasmine reveals that Angela has not been returning her calls, and Josh has also been found dead. Wei also notices several cops in the distance who have been looking for Angela. Later that night, Wei dismembers the dead bodies, puts them in plastic bags, and throws them into the pond. She later sends a message from a fake account to the college, claiming that Paul has been sleeping with a student. Wei even attaches a photo of herself with the professor. The next day, Paul is fired from his position, and his reputation is completely ruined. Wei then goes to his house, hoping to get the notebook, but Paul is not in the mood and orders her to leave. A while later, we see Paul experimenting with the substance. He applies it to one piece of skin, and it begins to blend seamlessly with another, indicating that he has finally achieved his goal. Paul then excitedly sends a voice message to Eve, informing her of the good news and invites her over to celebrate. Shortly after, Wei arrives at Paul's home, and notices him opening a secret compartment in the liquor cabinet. He grabs some narcotics from there, and heads to the other room to prepare drinks. This gives Wei the perfect opportunity to observe the compartment, and she discovers a vial of the substance he created and immediately steals it. But Wei notices that her skin is peeling off, so she pretends to have a headache and rushes out of the house. Afterward, Paul reflects on her strange behavior, and checks the compartment. He's shocked to find the vial missing, and somehow realizes the girl earlier was Wei, not Eve. Meanwhile, Wei has returned home, and painfully peels off Eve's skin from her face. She is soon visited by Jasmine, who is surprised to see her bruised face, and the fact that she's wearing Eve's dress. The empathetic Jasmine comforts her and assures her that everything is fine. She then invites Wei to stay with her tonight, which the latter accepts. But then, Jasmine opens the refrigerator and sees several dismembered body parts, right when Wei suffocates her to death. Wei is filled with regret, as Jasmine was the only one who had ever been nice to her. Not long after, Paul arrives at the house, and notices Wei curled up in a dark room. She expresses her disbelief that he figured it out, to which Paul boasts that she spent his entire life trying to solve that problem, but it only took him one afternoon. Wei screams that it was her father's work, but Paul is unconcerned, and declares that he will make history. He then asks where the vial is, and Wei responds it's in the fridge. And then this happens. Later, when Paul awakens, he finds himself tied to a table with his entire neck having been mutilated. Wei then places a piece of meat in his wound, and injects the substance directly into it. An elderly neighbor hears his scream. Here, his skin starts to regenerate at a rapid pace, similar to what happened to Wei's father. It quickly covers his mouth and nose, so Wei shoves a straw through his mouth, allowing him to suffer more. Soon, the neighboring woman shows up and is horrified by the gruesome scene, so she quickly runs out of the house to call the police. Realizing she's been exposed, Wei grabs a few belongings, takes the vial of medicine, and rushes out. She runs frantically through the town, but the police quickly spot her and begin chasing her on foot. Shortly after, Wei reaches an underground subway and meets the homeless man John. She pleads with him to hide her under his blanket, but she accidentally crushes the vial while hiding. The substance spills onto her wound and John's bodies, merging them into one grotesque form. The scene cuts to some time later, where we learn that Wei is still missing, and is being accused of multiple murders. The bodies of Angela, Eve, and Jasmine are discovered, while Paul is in the hospital in critical condition. We then see Aunt Ling, who is devastated by her daughter's death. She later notices someone on the street and calls out, assuming it's Wei, but it turns out to be someone else. Before the film ends, she notices a horribly disfigured figure nearby and flees in panic. It turns out to be the hideous fusion of John and Wei, with unusual placements of mouths, teeth, and fingers. Okay guys, thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.